We'd be like, okay, this is the piece that you're playing. Can you tell a story about it? Or what would you like to say about it? And we didn't even give them any kind of directions on what to write. And it was so interesting what we got back. I didn't even imagine that they could create something with the piece that they're playing. I didn't think that there was such a story that could be created behind this.
Hey, John Search here. Welcome back to Inside Astral, our series on the Philly-based musician mentoring program Astral Artists. For our third episode, Astral violinist Hannah Tarley joined us alongside pianist Dan Sato. Hannah has performed with the Violins of Hope. It's both an organization and a set of physical violins, many of which belonged to Jews before and during World War II. She also founded the music school Notes by the Bay in the San Francisco Bay Area, where they expose kids to music by bringing multiple art forms together. Hannah got her start in music thanks to her mother, also a violinist and a teacher.
My whole life, there were always, I don't remember a time when there weren't kids kind of running through our house and students coming in. And so when I was 2 years old, I noticed that there was so much fun going on in the music studio, and I believe I wasn't allowed to go in there so that I wouldn't disrupt the classes. And I guess my logic was, well, I should be doing what everybody else is doing. The violin is the thing that lets you into the room.
Yeah.
And so I kept asking my parents to get me an instrument, and so they got me one for my second birthday, and I got to join the room. I got to be a part of it.
You wanted to play with them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a sense of togetherness.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I remember a lot of kind of very happy memories of, being a part of this. At the time, it was a somewhat smaller group of students, and it was just so much fun to be in this group and to be creating music together and having fun, and it has only grown and expanded from there.
Yeah, you felt like you belonged.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you try to recreate that feeling for your students?
I think so. I definitely hope so. We have always a lot of excitement, and I love the sharing kind of the creative process with them and sharing with them and hopefully, imprinting upon them why I love it so much.
Yeah.
And sharing that energy with them, and that, our students always give so much energy back to us that, again, that creative process, and especially when we do the summer festival where we are creating this, we're working towards a show for the end of of this camp. And I really love how it's not always us giving instruction, but we always are so open, and we really love it when the students communicate back to us, and we truly try to make it something that we created together as the whole group.
They're learning to collaborate as musicians.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I imagine that feeling that you create was probably especially important in the past few years as we navigated a pandemic.
That is very true. We had to switch to Zoom ensembles. We were doing a lot of this stuff. And actually, those groups still remain to this day. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of fun. We work on pieces together. Very often kids are working towards an audition, or they have some kind of a deadline that they have a piece that they need to either record for or play for. And depending on the week, we'll do everybody playing one piece and working on it together. And it'll be very interesting because I'll actually have everybody play for everyone else. Mm-hmm. And you can even see in the eyes of the kids how they hear somebody else's interpretation of the same piece that they're doing, somebody else's kind of expression of it. And it's a lot of fun to see how from that, they kind of learn from that experience as well, and then they bring it into their own playing too.
Yeah. Do you see a difference in how people act when they're alone versus when they get to make music together?
There were a lot of smiling faces and a lot of excitement when we started coming back to doing groups together and playing together as an ensemble. When you feel the vibrations from the sound of the group together and you see eyes light up.
Yeah.
For sure. for sure. Yeah.
Cathartic after these years, right?
Yeah, it's been really fun to be together again.
Yeah. So I think because of what you do with other musicians, with students, I found one of the pieces in your repertoire to be really fitting. Could I ask you to play the Brahms Sonatensatz?
Of course, we would love to.
excellent.
Thank you very much.
A piece has a cool story behind it. I mean, so that's the Sonatensatz, which translates to sonata movement. And Brahms wrote it collaboratively with Robert Schumann and August Dietrich.
Yeah.
So you mention in your school's bio that you go beyond musical collaboration with your students. Could you tell me what else your students get to do?
When we do the summer camp, we love to involve aspects of poetry, of literature, of theater as well, which is something that I started to really develop an interest in. I think back in 2014 or 2013, after I participated in the Heifetz Institute in Virginia. And I've always been a theater buff. Part of my family is very involved in the theater.
There you
and
go.
I've always really loved this kind of, being able to be in the audience and look up at this incredible life that is happening on stage, and how in every single play you have the curtain. Like, my favorite moment is when the curtain just opens up and you see that there's life already on stage.
Yeah.
Like, I know that they're standing there waiting for the curtain to open, like I've been on stage, but
Right.
as an audience member, that same feeling of the life, like life already exists behind this curtain. And I have always found this to be kind of the most exciting moment to see it open up. And so what we do when we do the summer festival is we involve some poems. We will either read, like we like to take Shel Silverstein poems, or we try to do more like kid poetry that we can kind of put together, or for kids, I mean. Shel Silverstein is always a favorite, though.
Oh, yeah. Always.
For sure, like A.A. Milne, excuse me. And sometimes we will ask the kids to also write something by themselves, especially with the younger kids who are just maybe starting out or are only playing maybe like one short piece because it's their first time in the festival.
Right.
And one of the years we, just gave them like blank sheets of paper and a pen, and we'd be like, okay, this is the piece that you're playing. Can you tell a story about it? Or what would you like to say about it? And we didn't even give them any kind of directions on what to write. And it was so interesting what we got back. I didn't even imagine that they could create something with the piece that they're playing. I didn't think that there was such a story that could be created behind this.
Yeah.
So personal to each child. But they really created these amazing, really imaginative stories to go with their pieces.
And the students are creating life for their pieces beyond just the opening curtain and the feeling of being about to play it.
Yeah, exactly. And then from the stage, we actually ask them to read it. So we'll take one of the stories, for example, and we'll split it up. So that it's not just, okay, a little bit of homework, you have to write five sentences about the piece,
right.
But you actually have to share it. So from the stage, everybody plays together, and everybody is also involved in some aspect of speaking, and whatever theatrical idea or kind of theme that we have going on.
So these other forms of expression, what do they do for the performances? Do you notice a change?
I think it weaves things together really beautifully, because we try to, because everything is subjective, right? You can say this quote or this poem fits this piece, and somebody else can say, no, it doesn't. This one goes better, right? This is all very subjective. But what we try to do together, and what I've tried to do in my own solo recitals when I'm, performing from the stage, is see how I understand a particular piece in that moment and see what is possible to blend together in the moment.
And I imagine it helps the students connect. And I imagine in your own performance, does it help connect to the music better as well?
I think so. I think it gives another impression of what the notes could be, right? Because music is a language in itself, but it's a word. I mean, of course, unless you're a singer, but like for me, right? It's a wordless form of expression, and when I try to choose words to go with it, it can actually be very interesting, because sometimes I think, oh, today they fit very well, and then a little bit later I think, no, today they don't.
It adds a dimension.
Yeah, exactly.
So another dimension to add is expanding the repertoire as well. And I understand that you have commissioned a new work. Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, so we commissioned a work from one of my friends / colleagues / former classmates from Juilliard.
It's all the same in music.
Yeah,
Right?
I always feel like I have to say friend, then then you have to blend it all together. Marc Migó, we went to Juilliard together. We were in the same year when we were doing our masters, and when we were studying there, there was a performance that we had to do for. It was Juilliard composers. It was like a concert or an orchestral concert that we had to do, performing the pieces of various Juilliard composers that were, our classmates. And it was a really, really fun experience. I remember it was just so fun. Like somebody wrote a piece it was about the subway. And it was this really incredible. It was like life on the subway, or like different stops, and he represented every single sound of the train and movement and all of those things. And it was like you're reliving this experience, but through your instrument. It was actually really a lot of fun to do. And so Marc wrote a piece that I really loved. It was for solo violin and orchestra. And I loved how he brought out the melodies. I loved the whole structure of the piece. So when we were discussing with Astral about doing a commissioned work, my mind kind of immediately went to Marc. And so we started working on some ideas together.
That's cool. What's it called?
It's called The Seduction.
All right. Can we hear it, please?
La seducción.
La seducción en español.
Yes. Yeah, we can mark the Spanish. Yeah. Okay.
Hannah Tarley on the violin, Dan Sato on the piano. That was really cool. So Dan was talking earlier about his reactions to the two pieces you've played so far. Dan, you were saying...
Oh yeah, so we started off with the Brahms scherzo, and it's such a thick meat and potatoes piece. So I said, oh, that was like, since it's morning right now, I said it's like eating a steak for breakfast. And so the piece of this Marc's piece is seduction, and so I just alliterated and said steak and seduction, which is average Wednesday or Friday, I guess.
That would be the name of our concert tour. Steak and seduction coming to a city near you.
Concert and a dinner. Yeah.
So it starts in a pretty tonally recognizable way, and then it takes a turn.
It does. Yeah. I think that's kind of what I really like about Marc's writing. And I asked him several times, I'm like, can you please add these beautiful melodic melodies that you write to the piece? And he sort of mixed it all in.
Yeah. And it kind of fits the theme because seduction doesn't always happen in a pretty way.
No.
Right. Well, yeah. So when we were trying to come up with ideas to ask Marc for a composition, we really didn't know what to ask for because it's like going to a restaurant and doing an omakase type situation.
Uh-huh.
So the one thing that we arrived at, just even as a joke, was a modern take on romance, like with the apps and stuff.
That was literally a joke that I made to Dan.
Yeah,
it was a joke.
Yeah,
but that's how things happen like this sometimes. Is it just starts so innocuously, and then you produce something like that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, we were literally having a conversation because I called Dan before I knew that I was going to be talking to Marc, and I called Dan. I'm like, okay, so what do we want this piece to mean? And just being a little silly and stupid, I said, we were like, oh, wouldn't it be hilarious if this were like a conversation between piano and violin and a sort of a take on, dating apps and stuff.
There you go.
There's swiping and violin playing.
I'm taking out of my own personal life,
I love the twist on that. It's not only la seducción, but it's actually about Tinder.
Yeah, very relevant.
It was just, we laughed it off, and we were like, okay, but let's be serious now. It was just a stupid joke.
Or not. I mean,
it was a stupid joke on my behalf, and. And then I talked to Marc, and I was like, you know what, we were having a very serious conversation. And then I was like, you know what, we were laughing with Dan about this. And he was like, oh, haha, very funny. Okay, we went back to serious. And then he's like, okay, let me think about it. Let's talk in a couple of weeks. And so we had a conversation again in a couple of weeks. He was like, hey, you know what? So that idea about the dating apps. I almost fell off my chair. I was like, I was kidding. I was kidding, right?
Right.
But we now have a piece.
There you go. And it's a piece about love, just in a different kind of way, right?
It's of our time, yes.
Yes. And that's the thing. It is music of our time, and it is literally about our time.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing. With the composer, or like a poet in a sense, he found this idea, and then just the music and the melodic aspect of the piece, and out of this just silliness, right, quote unquote silliness, but this incredible piece was born. So it's really amazing how I have so much respect for composers and admiration, and that just. I don't know how they can create all of this out of, a half an hour conversation that we had, which was 15 minutes of laughter.
It just becomes music.
Yeah.
And that's part of the collaborative nature of music as well, creating the music from scratch.
Exactly.
So to get back to something a little bit more serious, I didn't want to go before we talked about the Violins of Hope. And what you have gotten to do with them. Could you tell me a bit about that?
So Violins of Hope is an incredible organization. They are, it's a father and son. They are both luthiers. One is based in Tel Aviv in Israel, and the father is based in Tel Aviv, and his son is between Turkey and Israel. And it's an amazing, amazing family. And they have, since World War II, because of their own family history, have been collecting and restoring and bringing back to life instruments, mostly violins, that have a history with the Holocaust. Some violins they would get in sort of pieces. The instrument would be broken, and they restore them and they bring them back to life. Then they, make them sing and make them play again. And for many years now, they have been doing these sort of like touring the world in a sense and putting on really amazing exhibits / performances / educational like visits to schools, stuff like that. And talking about the history of the instruments, talking about the history of the Holocaust, and inviting musicians such as myself to come and actually play on the instruments. Which for me, I've done projects with them since 2017, and for me, it's always been an absolutely incredible experience. They came to San Francisco, to the Bay Area, which is my hometown, back in what was it? It was January and February of 2020. So like right before, and we did really amazing concerts and visits to schools, bringing the instruments. I think they brought 20 or 30 instruments. I may be wrong in the number, but in a single concert, you will play maybe 4, 5, 6 of the instruments. So first of all, like as a musician, as violinists, we're used to playing on one instrument for very, very long periods of time, unlike pianists. And so always, whenever you have to switch to a new instrument, it's like, okay, give me a second to get used to this this instrument.
It's not just keys.
Yeah. But for me, I think the most mind-blowing thing is to sort of, I have to split myself sort of in two, because on the one hand, I'm holding in my hands what I know is an instrument that was played, for example, in the men's orchestra at Auschwitz. So I pick it up and, my own family history, it's, tears, everything immediately. It's a very, very powerful and overpowering feeling.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I have to think, okay, this is my partner. This is my collaborative partner for the next, 2 hours or whatever it is. And I have to, perform this piece by Bach on it. And going into schools and talking about it has been very eye-opening for me and very interesting, to bring a history to people. For a lot of people, it is not their history.
Right.
But at the same time, it's my history, but it may not be their history.
Yeah.
And you have to present it in such a way that you can, find empathy in other people. And I think it is so important to talk about it with, high schoolers and middle schoolers. And at the same time, you bring the beauty of the instruments and of the violins, because the violins speak, and they kind of speak for themselves and they sing for themselves when you're playing them. So yeah, Violins of Hope is, I think, one of the most meaningful projects that I have done in my career.
And you're playing with the people who had played those violins in the past.
Actually, very true. Yeah, there was one particular instrument that had a story, how this violin basically traveled with this man, and playing this violin saved his life.
Yeah.
It helped to feed his family. It's a very, I get chills just talking about it. And every time I would pick up this one particular violin, I would feel, I'm not a huge believer in, a lot of things, but I would feel this kind of cloud surround me. I'm not, it was, with this instrument, every time I picked it up, I knew that something was going to happen, like something special was going to happen.
Yeah. And
yeah, a lot of these concerts brought a lot of tears. And a lot of people coming up to me and, being like, I remember in Florida, one woman came up to me and said, my mother was in one of the concentration camps. And, thank you. Like, this was an incredible is not the right word for this, but
well, it's very moving.
She gave me a hug, and it was like no other words really needed to be said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It shows that this togetherness can be expressed in so many ways and in such meaningful ways for people.
Yeah, and history has to be taught, and we have to know it and understand it. And the work that Violins of Hope does to bring these violins, there are a few cellos as well, but they always say that violins were much easier to run with because they're much smaller.
Pianos have no hope.
Yes, pianos, no.
Voices?
Yeah.
Well, it's really an expression of the love for this music as well.
Absolutely.
So to wrap up, we've been talking about love in various serious and less serious ways. Could you play just a piece that you love?
Of course.
What are you going to play?
So I think that we're going to do the third movement of Prokofiev's second sonata. So it was originally flute sonata, but then he also rewrote the violin version. And it's a really, really beautiful movement. I like to think that it kind of takes me to somewhere in Paris.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for coming in, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to Inside Astral. This episode, we featured violinist Hannah Tarley, and joining her was pianist Dan Sato. Our senior producer is Alex Arif, and Paul Marchesani is our engineer. Tyler McClure is our production director with assistance from Ryan Hankins. Zev Kane is WRTI's classical program director. Shout out to Lourdes, Grace, and Elisa from Astral. Be sure to follow WRTI on all the socials, YouTube, all the things, and don't forget to tell a friend about WRTI. And if you aren't already, become a member so we can keep bringing you more great podcasts like this. I'm John Search. Thanks so much for joining us. Till next time.